In Minneapolis, the former police officer who killed George Floyd has been sentenced to 22 and a half years in prison. Floyd's family made impact statements in front of Derek Chauvin in the courtroom yesterday. Floyd's 7-year-old daughter, Gianna, was one of those who spoke.
I wanted to know from the man himself, why? What were you thinking? What was going through your head when you had your knee on my brother's neck?
I miss you and I love you.
For an entire year, I had to relive George being tortured to death.
Mothers and daughter there. Floyd's murder sparked widespread protests in the U.S. and right around the world. Now that the sentencing is done, many people are asking whether this will be a turning point for racial justice. For more on this, we've invited Cornell Brooks onto the program. He's a professor of Harvard Kennedy School, and he joins us now from Manassas, Virginia. Professor Brooks, always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks so much for joining us.
Always good to be with you.
Let's start with this conversation and talk about first with your reaction to that 22-and-a-half-year sentence handed out to Derek Chauvin.
Candidly, I was heartened and disappointed, meaning the sentence, its rarity and its severity have everything to do with its legitimacy. That is to say, it is very rare for a police officer to be charged and convicted. Roughly 2% of the 1,000 people who are killed each year by the police, roughly that percent actually face a charge and a conviction. So it was heartening that a police officer was in fact charged and convicted. What was disappointing was that Derek Chauvin could put his knee on George Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes, torturing him to death, and receive not the maximum, but essentially 2/3 of the maximum in terms of 22 years, which would really mean 12 years behind bars. And so it's heartening. It says that something can be done. It also says that more should be done.
As you say, extremely rare to have a charge laid, to have a conviction registered, and then to have a sentence this long imposed. So do you think it has the potential to change the course of history?
I believe so. And the reason I believe so is not so much because of the decision the jurors made or the sentence that the judge gave, but in fact, the literally millions of people who took to the streets last summer, 26 million in the United States, millions more around the world, particularly in Canada, who came out in moral solidarity. What gives me hope is literally the moral convictions and moral consensus of the world that things have to change. It is shocking that 1,000 people are literally killed each and every year. In other words, imagine a town in Canada of, say, 10,000, and 1 out of every 10 citizens is killed each and every year. And so the point being here is people have arrived at a moral consensus that enough is enough. And so I believe it signals a change. But as Martin Luther King said, change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability. In other words, we have to make that change. So my hope lies literally in people, not so much in the rarity and the severity of this sentence. But it does signal that things can change and that they, in fact, must change.
So I guess the question is, how do you keep those wheels rolling when this fades from the headlines and he is in jail and his family still has that hole in their hearts, but this broader society, how do you keep those wheels of change moving?
Well, that is exactly the question. And you know, having covered these issues so well and for so long, when the headline fades or the hashtag is no longer popular, people leave the streets. But here's what we know. There's an active push in the U.S. Congress for the passage of the George Floyd Act. People continue to press the case in the streets. There's continued organizing in the academy, in the streets, in the United States and elsewhere. So my belief is that there's, in fact, a movement here. Right? In other words, we have seen literally the largest demonstration in American history and one of the largest and most geographically widespread demonstrations in the world. So the point being here is there's a certain movement momentum in this moment. And to be candid with you, there will be more hashtags. There will be more George Floyds. unless policing changes, and it has not shown that it will change tomorrow. And so we know that we're going to be on this subject again, organizing again, talking more again, and ultimately, I believe we're going to see more progress.
Professor Brooks, we've got just under a minute, but I do want to ask you one other question. You're talking about the political, you're talking about the institutional. Can we just, in the short time left, talk about the individual? What would you like people to keep in their hearts and minds moving forward?
I'd like them to keep in their hearts and minds a sense of hope. In other words, look at the Floyd family. They've demonstrated grace, they've demonstrated courage, they've demonstrated fortitude. Their dignity and their strength and their resolve is a source of hope because it is a model for us in terms of how we behave, how we lead, and how we govern our society. And so that's where my hope lies, and I think we should focus on them.
And here endeth the lesson. Cornell Brooks, thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it.
It's good to be with you.
Cornell Brooks, professor at Harvard Kennedy School, and he joined us from Manassas, Virginia.